Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler. I'm a man on a mission. More about the mission in a minute. I've uh, advertised that the lead topic today is going to be why some people need for the rules they want to live by to be imposed on all. And I'll get to that in a moment. I decided that that's actually going to be not quite in keeping with what I've identified as my strategy here, which is to talk about something concrete and the kind of thing that's already on people's minds. Because my mission's got to do with the big picture. And I know that that's not where everybody's head's at all the time. So let me start with something more concrete, which has got to do with I think there's a need for um, people to step up talking about the crisis we have in the American judicial system. I've watched the various good legal authorities like Andrew Weissman and Neil Katyal, and I watch uh, well, various people in Congress who are sometimes saying something about what's going on. But there is a problem in the American judicial system. There are a number of problems actually that are visible. Some of which are sort of like unfortunate, like human imperfection. But we have a crisis about the American judicial system, which I've called attention to by saying that the Supreme Court of the United States, with its aligning itself with the criminal against the rule of law by helping Trump get months of a delay that there's no good reason for, um, that there's something here that's beyond what we have customarily had. Now, in terms of customarily, perhaps I should start with something I read about on the Bulwark, which is a bunch of very intelligent former Republicans who are on the same side as people like me of a more liberal bent, because the issue right now is democracy versus fascism. And um, if the Supreme Court is a fascist territory, we really ought to be calling this situation out as an emergency. But I wasn't delighted to see. I usually agree with these people on Bulwark, and I admire what they're doing. I get regular emails. This guy was trying to talk about the rule of law, and it's really no guarantee of justice. Which, okay, there's no guarantees. That it's a set of rules that people follow and you play, things crank out. And it's just, we shouldn't expect outcomes that are so great all the time. Well, okay, there will be miscarriages of justice. There will be bad judges as well as good judges. But what we've seen lately is really at a different level. And it needs to be called out more thoroughly. I mean, people like Andrew Weissman are just sort of gradually warming up to talking about the partisanship and like that. But we have outright, full out corruption, and actually corruption isn't the right word. That usually implies that it's got to do with money, and of course the plutocracy is involved here with the Supreme Court. But it's not really the issue of corruption as it's usually understood. I don't know what quite the right word would be, but I like the formulation that there's a force of fascism, which is really what I've been saying for, well, 20 years anyway, and close to 30 if you take that I saw what the propagandists were doing with Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich. But if that's the problem, we really need to get outside of what that Bulwark guy was talking about, which is the imperfection of human institutions. I want to hear Andrew Weissman not just talk about partisan, but go all the way and talk about that we've got a serious crisis in America having to do with the inroads that fascism has made into the American judicial system. And that includes people like Judge Cannon, I mean, what was she doing on anybody's list? Well, I think if you look into how somebody like her would have got there, she probably sold her soul a long time ago, and it was recognized by the, what's it called? Who are the people who put up the list to the president? Not the Judicial Watch, well, you probably know who I'm talking about. I think it starts with an H, and they've been feeding Republicans people to put on the court, and now we find out through Senator Whitehouse has been instrumental in some of this. They're teaching them basically how to write a bogus decision. They got this history and tradition thing. I mean, we've got a political force that is not at all committed to the rule of law, that is taking over the judiciary, that through Trump and this outfit who, embarrassingly, I can't remember the name of. So we need to, White House has done wonderful work on this. Senator Whitehouse from Rhode Island, former Attorney General of the state, and a very smart guy. He comes from a sort of sterling New England kind of a background that sends its sons to, the best prep schools. I don't remember if he went to a prep school, but I think he went to Yale. Anyway, he's a really good specimen, but he's not the kind of person to ignite the alarm that the country should be feeling. I mean, another thing that I've called attention to that we need to be talking about, and we haven't. I mean, what we saw when Trump was president was something about the pardon power. He was using the pardon power, besides this real SOB sheriff in Arizona, who is a sort of fellow fascist that he didn't have any particular personal stake in, but he pardoned all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons, and the worst of it was he was quite prepared to use the pardon to save his accomplices. First of all, to make deals with them, basically saying, almost in public, you keep shut, don't be a rat. You keep your mouth shut and I'll take care of you with the pardon power. So what we see is that the pardon power is, there's no check or balance on it. This has got to be, why haven't we heard anything about this? This has exposed something really serious, but anyway, that's what we really need to amp up. That we've left the territory of, oh golly, not everything's working fine. Well, that's the way it is with human institutions, like the Bulwark guy will seem to be trying to say, if I read him right. And we got to get to, this war of democracy versus fascism, with the rule of law versus a destructive political force that is lawless. That's going to a very different level, and we need people who, I imagine somebody like Andrew Weissman is so imbued with respect for this system. I mean, he's one of its finest specimens, and he reveres the rule of law. And I think it's probably very difficult that he hasn't been prepared. And I'm using him to exemplify probably something much larger, is that the people who have committed themselves to making this system work are kind of loath to even seeing that things have gone awry, that the dark side has taken over what was supposed to be the beacon of light that helped American society move toward justice to at least a reasonable degree, so that we were, for most of the early generations of the Republic, we were probably, in spite of slavery, probably the average citizen was probably more given access to real justice than maybe in any other society on the planet. We're not nearly so unique now, and we're losing ground because this force is taking over. So there's a little bit of concrete for you, or asphalt, or I don't know, however you want it paved. My strategy is to be at least a little credible about things on a lower level, and before I get to some of the big picture level, where I claim that I've got a way of understanding the human story that's integrated, that puts a lot of pieces together, and that if enough people saw the world in those ways, which I claim that I can demonstrate are substantially true and really do illuminate some important questions, putting them in a very different light. If I could get that idea out there, enough people to be thinking and seeing things in these terms, I'm here because I believe that could actually have a beneficial impact on how things unfold. But let me get to a little bit bigger picture than this immediate judiciary issue. That's a fairly big picture too by the standards of our times, which sees everything in pieces. I mean, people are going to, I haven't heard anybody yet, in terms of making the connections. Is this true? I believe it's true. But I've never heard anybody yet make a connection between what we saw the Supreme Court do with Trump's absolutely absurd claim of presidential immunity that the Supreme Court should have just knocked out of the box back in December so that we could get on with the trial that America needed for us to have. I don't remember if I've seen anybody make a connection between that and a lot of other things that we see happening in the judiciary, because this fascist force has been so successful in taking over the American supposed justice system. Not just Aileen Cannon down in Florida, though I haven't even heard anybody saying, look at this ugly thing going on in the court in Florida, and look at this ugly thing the Supreme Court just managed to do for the criminal against the rule of law. I haven't even heard that connection, let alone some of these things about how they, the Dobbs decision is kind of, but the way that the Supreme Court dealt with the abortion issue when they didn't put a stay on Texas's obviously unconstitutional anti-abortion law. I mean, until the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, that law was simply unconstitutional. But the Texas fascists and the Supreme Court fascists worked out some kind of really ugly agreement. This is visible. So it's concrete, but seeing exactly what it is requires making connections. And this is not something that our current intellectual habits are really big at. There's a lot of intelligence you can see working at work here. I mean, I tune in, for example, to watch a little bit of March Madness, and I hear these guys around the table talking about basketball. Now, I played basketball. I wasn't a college player, but I was a starting player on a high school starting five. And I thought, I think I kind of know the game. I put a lot of hopes into it. I wanted to be, a big star. I didn't get to be nearly as big as I wanted to, but I studied the game. These guys really know basketball. I mean, some of the insights about the strategies and clock management and how to commit the fouls when you're trying to make the last 20 seconds, there's just a whole lot of stuff that these guys really know. So there's no shortage of intelligence in our world. I mean, I've got an iPhone over here. It is admittedly a 6S. But nothing succeeds like a 6S. So that's a pun. So there's lots of intelligence going on around, but I'm not entirely, I don't think we see things in the interconnected way that we need to when we're in a battle. For our survival and for the survival of American democracy. It doesn't if you don't see the whole battlefield, how are you going to come up with the best strategies for fighting it? I just don't think you can. I mean, if you fight every little skirmish as if it was a separate thing, and not that there's this almost global, I mean, it is actually global in terms of the rise of fascism. But if you look across America, there are a whole lot of interconnected parts here. And they're about what we are up against. And that is, whoops, that's the title of my 2015 book, which is What We're Up Against. We need to see what we're up against to fight it right. But anyway, so the judicial system is not really just to be seen as a a separate a bunch of whole separate issues. It's a systemic thing it's bigger than the judicialists. The rise of fascism is much bigger than what they've done to the judicial system. But it was the Republican Party was kind of a fascistic force, and I was writing about this from 2004 onward, before Trump came in and made it so naked. But and one example of it is the way that Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate stole a Supreme Court seat. That is connected with this whole picture. Well, but when I say it's an integrative vision, I mean that it. I've been working. I was trained to put pieces together, and I've been working on this since. I mean, that book back there is sort of the foundation stone, but I didn't get there in one swoop when I was 24. So it's been over a half century, but it's really been closer to 60 years I've been working on putting these pieces together, and part of it is psychological. I would say that my initial intellectual form that emerged was I was basically steeped in depth psychology, Freud and Jung and those lesser people, combined with an idea of how the larger systems work with respect to depth psychology, like interpreting mythology and religious symbols and literary genres. So just to my dissertation, which I was an undergraduate at Harvard, 1963 to 67, and 66 to 67 was my senior year. And I worked, I decided over the summer after my junior year, I wanted to study the genre of tragedy as a tragic drama. The Greeks, that I've been very excited to read, and Shakespeare, who is mind blowing at times, and these plays that had been written by the likes of Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, that had this pattern that Aristotle wrote a thing about, and I wanted to understand what are the psychological issues that tragedy, this pattern of action that ends, that builds the way it does, it builds around this tragic hero with his particular set of characteristics, and then culminates in this kind of ending, which is purges pity and terror, according to Aristotle, but I didn't think that really captured the psychological essence of it. Anyway, I went into doing that, and I've been, and then I got the idea that I thought showed that, well, a couple of the implications of it. Well, the ugliness we see in human history isn't an expression of human nature. It's not. We really haven't understood who we are because we don't understand the nature of the systemic force that's been operating. I won't go into that more right now, but I probably will today. When I got that, and then I've been working ever since, and I'm trying to integrate everything I know, and that's what I feel like I'm trying to present here on this mission that I am, because I think that there are ways of seeing the whole human drama, big pieces of the human drama. I don't know what proportion of it, but I guess in my mind there's room for I don't know. It's at least half of what we need to know about our nature, what's happened to our species when we launched onto the path of civilization, and the nature of the challenges that we face. I think that it shows a number of things that need to be at the center of how we regard what we're doing here at this stage of our the evolution of our species and its civilization, which according to me, we have about a 50-50 chance of destroying ourselves, destroying human civilization in the not so many coming generations. So that's the stakes that require me to come out here and just leave it all on the field, as they say, trying to convey this thing. And there is a story of what it means to become a civilization creating species. And that story hasn't been recognized by the secular worldview, which adopts the Darwinian perspective about how did we get here, but hasn't gone through what all gets exposed if you look at the world and the history of the world through that prism. That's what I've been doing for 54 years now. But going back to what I was going to talk about at the beginning, about why some people need to impose their values on everybody. This is something that I owe something to a student I had back in 2005. I was already at that time focused on America's moral and spiritual crisis, which I saw as involving the rise of a fascist force and the takeover of power by a fascist force in the W administration. I didn't, it wasn't as florid as what we see with Trump. I mean, with Trump, it really, nothing is hidden, but it was already profoundly alarming to me what I saw. And I gave a lot of thought, as a psychologist I once was, to some of what I was looking at that was happening on the right, which was that Karl Rove and W had won the 2004 election by gaining the allegiance of a whole lot of people who wanted to give their power to a political force that would impose their values on everybody. The issue of gay marriage was at the center of all this, and but abortion also. So the discussion in that class was about what is it that makes people want their society to create a moral force field that's backed by the power of the society to enforce it. And out of that discussion, I don't remember how the discussion went, but this woman gave an image that I thought was brilliant. She talked about endoskeletons, and that's, if you're familiar, from zoology or whatever, endo meaning the skeleton, meaning that which holds the whole thing together. And you and I've got this endoskeleton, that we've got the rib cages and the skulls and all the metatarsals and all those things, and the hip bones connected to the thigh bone. And hear the name of the Lord. So that's the endoskeleton. We've got the skeleton inside us. It holds us together. It gives us our structure. And then there are the No, we're the endoskeletons. I can't remember if I've screwed this whole thing up. But endo meaning inside, exo meaning on the outside, like a beetle that has this hard thing on the outside that holds everything together from the outside in. And she used that metaphor to illuminate a difference between what she thought she saw on the conservative side, the traditionalist side, the side that was voting for George W. Bush, despite the signs that were visible to a number of us, but a very small minority on the liberal side, that there was something rising here that was fascistic. We saw that this fascism was getting its power from the people who needed someone to enforce their morality on this whole society. So why? Why were they exoskeletons? And I pondered that for I don't know, it was sort of the way I do. It was in the back of my mind. This was the class was in 2005. By 2006, I had written one of my more substantial essays. Usually, I write things of an op-ed length. Well, that's not quite true either. I mean, anyway, it's called. It has endo and exoskeletons in the title. So if you go to my website, betterhumanstory.org, and put into the search box like EXO, it'll bring it up, and it'll do a better job than I'm about to do of providing an answer to why is it that people needed that. And it's nothing hugely unfamiliar about that. I mean, that may have been an important part of what was happening in 2004 to give this proto-fascist Republican administration another 4 years to be very destructive in the world, including continuing to botch the Iraq War for a while, and overseeing the bubble in the housing market, and having a torture memo to cover over so that nobody could be held responsible for behavior in this of torturing people that violated not only American law but our treaty obligations as well. So I did come up with an answer, and it feeds into a general concept I have that I think should always be held in mind, which is the way brokenness begets brokenness. So what I came to believe is that, first of all, that liberals have in some respects failed to understand their fellow citizens on this matter. I started the essay with talking about how people had observed how the reddest of the areas also tended to be most full of the kinds of behavior, whether it was bad family dynamics or things like pornography, or the various kinds of things that these same people were trying to get enforced on the society. Liberals were thinking, oh, these guys are just hypocrites. They pretend to care about these things, but they're committing the sins that they're wanting to prevent everybody else from being able to choose their own path through life about. But it depends on how you define hypocrisy. I'm just going to leave that aside, because the point is that's more important is that they actually do care about those values. It is, I think, in many cases at least, very important to them that they be able to think of themselves as the kind of people that the morality that they've internalized, that they believe in, describes who they are and how they behave. But there's a problem that goes with that. Oftentimes, for one thing, the morality that is absorbed in a conservative family is generally harsher than the morality that you get in a more democratic, small d kind of family, with more that's more indulgent. So the harshness of the morality makes it a challenge to live up to it. Also, there's the harsher it is, the more injury that goes with it, the internalization process. So there's a bit of brokenness right there. I mean, we all have to become moral actors from the time we're born to the time that we become members of society, whatever that means. I mean, you could be a member in a way as a toddler, but certainly as an adult. We need to create a decent order. And so we got to have some discipline over how we behave. But there's a balance that morality needs to achieve between meeting people's needs and having those people's needs go unmet to the extent that that's required by the harsh morality that they've internalized. The difficulty of living up to that harsh morality, particularly when people haven't necessarily been able to integrate what they've internalized with the irreconcilabilities that go along in relation to their own inborn human needs. It becomes very difficult to walk the straight and narrow, the straighter and the more narrow that path is. And the result is that the traditional, not very liberated kind of morality tends to be associated with strict social controls, because that's what's needed to make it work. The person in that situation who's internalized a harsh morality needs the exoskeleton as the ally of its conscious allegiance to the moral, to the right way, to the often having to do with sexual things, but which is interesting why that's singled out. And by the way, I have a video that you might want to look at, which is why is human sexuality so beset by complications, and part of it actually is related to this. So for those people, in order for them to live up to the rules that they think that they must abide by, they need help. They need the force of the society that punishes, that prosecutes, that forbids, to be the ally of their moral commitment, which is only a part of them because they're still human beings that have got needs, and they've been injured some to the extent to which it's a harsh morality they've internalized. So they're not hypocrites. They're people who can't really get their lives to work all that well in the ways that they feel a moral commitment to making it work as good people that follow God's law or whatever the deal is. their personality structure lacks a kind of integration to the extent to which, if they don't get help from the outside, then the ability of the good to triumph over the evil impulses is thrown into doubt. So we in America have been seeing a lot of loosening up of how much morality of all kinds, even like dress codes in a restaurant or anything like that. All the shoulds that have been a part of our cultural apparatus. I mean, it's a lot looser than when I was a kid. Just taking how do you dress to be in one event or another, the formalities have really eroded considerably. And I kind of like that. I was part of the counterculture. I mean, the counterculture sort of arose around the same time as I graduated from college in 1967. But, you might start earlier with the Beatles. There's no real just lines, but I was definitely part of the counterculture. I wasn't a card-carrying member of the hippie movement or the radical left, but I did live in Berkeley in 1968 through the time in 1970 when that book, The Parable of the Tribes, when that central idea came to me. I was part of that scene, and America was very divided at that time. And I didn't feel comfortable with everything about the counterculture or with everything in the anti-Vietnam movement. But to the extent to which I was on one side of the divide or another, I was definitely on the not the hard hat construction worker side, not the policeman who pulled me over just because I had a beard side. There was a division. And I was part of the counterculture. And so when people said things like, do your own thing, yeah, I can dig that. And if it feels good, do it. Now, I saw that there was a certain evolutionary organic truth to that. If it didn't feel good, God wouldn't have given us wings or something like that. But I didn't go all the way on that. And other such sort of ways of articulating the ethos, which had to do with basically giving people a whole lot of permission to do your own thing, to find your own way, and get society off your back. Part of it had to do with the illegality of marijuana enforced by a bunch of people who thought that they were so superior when they went home and had themselves a cocktail. I mean, there was just, there were a lot of divisions in the society, and we thought, we in the counterculture thought that a lot of things should get opened up. And I think a lot of things did need to be opened up. But we also made some intellectual errors about understanding what we ourselves were. I think of the counterculture types as being sort of baby boom generation, middle class whites, more or less of my contemporaries, people who had had the benefit of growing up in a rather well-ordered American society. And so we thought, this is my speculation. I mean, this is me sort of interposing into the reality what maybe was there, but I don't know for sure. I think that we mistook what we found in ourselves when we became liberated from having to be so controlled by society, that we thought that we were looking at human nature, whereas we were looking at a nature which had already had the benefit of being well formed by in my case, a middle class family that taught us how to behave from an early age onward, and going to public schools where we played by the rules and were respectful to our teachers, and all kinds of stuff that we could just take for granted, that molded us into the kind of countercultural types that could rebel, could get stoned, could take to the streets to criticize LBJ and then Nixon for what they were doing in Vietnam, could dress in funny ways, could grow beards, or have our hair be long, to essentially give the finger to a lot of the social morality, but then still behave ourselves within decent limits. We weren't Charles Manson, what's that? The killer of Sharon Tate and all the rest. What's the name of that movie? But anyway, we were good middle class kids in a state of rebellion, and good middle class kids wasn't quite the same thing as saying, "Oh, we don't need any social forces to shape people. We'd already been pretty shaped." I had to wear a tie to every dinner in college and a jacket. We were getting trained to be English gentlemen. I mean, that wasn't exactly it, but that was historically, that's what, So we underestimated the importance of finding one's way as a culture with respect to something between excessive controls and anything goes. The people I knew in the counterculture all went on after a certain interregnum of rebellion to become successful upper middle class professionals. I'm not upper middle class, but I've been able to scrape my way to always living reasonably decently. And I don't really care that much about what money can buy beyond what I've already got. If somebody gave me $10 billion, well, I wouldn't bail Trump out today. But basically, I wouldn't change my style of life at all. I would help my kids some, and then I would ask, well, what can I do with the rest of this? I really like the way Steve Jobs' wife and Bill Gates' ex-wife have put so much into trying to make the world better with their billions. But anyway, I ain't got the billions, and I'm not looking for them, and I'm grateful that I survived doing what I'd been doing. Let's see, where was I? We made the mistake of opening up the gates. We rocked the boat, and we made use of that to make important improvements in the society, including how people who are not of a sexually orthodox majority form, persecuting the kinds of people who have been persecuted because of their sexuality for centuries and even for millennia. I think that is not justice. There are some ways in which there should be greater tolerance, but there's also really a need to make sure that the requisite order is maintained. And that goes back to the people who need to enforce their morality on everybody. And that growing out of a brokenness, making them natural allies of a force of brokenness like fascism. W won the 2004 election using the needs of the exoskeletons to advance a presidency that was pretty consistently destructive. I mean, I don't believe that Americans ever sufficiently recognized how much damage the W presidency did to the country and to the world with its invasion of Iraq. It was a really big deal, and it was very consistent, and it should have set off alarm bells, and it didn't. I mean, not nearly enough. Not nearly enough. But I'm not going to go down that road right further. This is a systemic problem. So we got the liberations of the counterculture having their excesses. And then there's the scary situation for the exoskeletons that liberation threw them into. If the society isn't going to enforce their morality, if they've got the choice of having an abortion, which reminds me of a bumper sticker that I agree with what they want, but it's not really fair. It said, "Oh, don't want an abortion, or you don't believe in abortion, don't have one," or something like that, and that just misses their dilemma. They don't want the choice. Giving them really the choice is a dangerous situation for them, because they depended upon the addition of, I want to be a good person and do things the way God tells me to, and I need the society to put a scarlet letter on my forehead if I commit adultery. They needed it, and they're now in a scared situation where they've got choices they don't want. They're dependent on the force of their own commitment to that straight and narrow path to be able to make the right choice. So the systemic aspect of this is that, how shall I put it? I'm not even sure. I'll try this one. Our society opened up a whole lot in terms of the range of permissible options for people. And we went from a lot more uptight and conformity enforcing to wherever you want to be. I mean, in the 1950s that was true, but how much more true was it in the 1820s? I don't know. I mean, I've studied American culture. I think that there was a lot, not just in the South where you get run out on the rail if you had a wrong opinion, but we went through a lot of loosening as a society that believes in liberty. I mean, we had certain principles that we were founded with, which are kind of beautiful, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Endowed by our Creator with these. The idea of liberty and us each individually able to find our way, freedom of religion. No longer does somebody enforce a religious orthodoxy on everybody, which, That pretty much characterizes a lot of civilized history before the Constitution. That's, we've opened up in the direction of liberty to a very great extent. And I think that what we see in America today with the rise of fascism into such power is that we didn't make this transition in an ideal way. I don't know what grade we should give ourselves for this kind of liberation, but I don't think a very high one. We are almost losing at this moment that democratic system that is founded on those principles of endowed by our creator with certain inalienable rights. That's just the opposite of the fascism that threatens to take over. And the connection between this drama between the endoskeletons and the exoskeletons and the systemic failures of that the endoskeletons like me who participated in a in a general way of extending the range of liberty with the counterculture. The exoskeletons that never managed to integrate themselves all that well because they got this harsh kind of form of morality, which is most traditional moralities have been pretty harsh, and particularly the ones when I see here in the Shenandoah Valley, and I've talked on the radio with people of a sort of fundamentalist, traditionalist Christian bent. That's a real straight and narrow that they've gotten. Very. I think that I understand where they're coming from, and it can create a beautiful person, but it also creates certain vulnerabilities. And one of the things, what has happened on the right is the weakening of the social political state force to enforce morality has left those exoskeleton types with a worse balance of power between their being able to be the good people they want to be and they're becoming expressing the forbidden impulses. And it's worse than that. I mean, to begin with, we've got these human needs which go along with whatever our the impulses are that we collectively as a human nature and individually as particular individuals, we have these impulses. We've got impulses, I guess there are some people who are asexual or something like that, but all of us have powerful sexual impulses, or almost all of us, because that's been really so important to keeping our DNA moving into the future. But there are differences between, I gather, it would appear that people are born with sexualities that have different qualities or vectors or whatever. I don't have any great insight into why people are any different from one another, how much is developmental. It looks to me more and more like they're just things that are inborn. But it isn't just that the inherent needs of the human being, whatever they may be, for love, to be held, to be cuddled as an infant or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of ways in which children growing up are treated in ways that create wounds. I don't know how much, I think that the psychology that I studied from like Freud and such, way overestimated how much it was an inevitable thing that our needs would come up against social. But in our civilization that generates these harsh moralities, that has been, as as I maintain, shaped by the demands of power. That's what makes for a harsh morality, and a harsh morality makes for a need for people who are trying to live according to that morality to have help from the outside. And when that help goes away, you not only have the original impulses, whether they be, homosexual or whatever was forbidden, or impulses of wanting to be held and needing to be dependent, feel gratification from opening oneself to one's feelings of dependency on the mother, say, and forming a deep attachment, whatever it is. To the extent to which the morality that was internalized is wounding, there will be pain and rage that were not part of the initial human nature thing that got born in. And that pain and rage is if it's strong enough to govern, and if it's deep enough not to be subject to a lot of healing, that pain and rage is a fuel for the fascist force. In that essay, which I encourage you to read, go put EXO, EXO, in the search box of my website, abetterhumanstory.org. I quote a passage from Shakespeare's play Troilus and Cressida about sort of the progression into ever greater darkness until universal wolf is essentially loosed upon the human world, until eventually the wolf devours itself, is how that passage ends. I don't remember the passage well enough. But that's there, and that's part of what's happened, I think. Now, when we look at the fascistic force that's taken over the Republican Party, more or less, mostly taken over conservative America, I mean, like the Republican electorate, we see a lot of sociopaths. There are, if you look at, say, Rush Limbaugh and Newt Gingrich, let's say, and Karl Rove, and the people who operated, have operated, from the Murdochs on to Roger Ailes, and then the whole Fox News crowd, and Tucker Carlton, all that, Donald Trump. They're all sociopaths. I don't know if the sociopath is a 100% thing. It probably isn't. But when you look at, say, the decision that all the Republicans made, all but a few, about how to deal with Donald Trump trying to launch a coup d'etat, it's not ambiguous what morality, conscience, principle, oath keeping required of every single Republican. It was obvious that anyone who had taken an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States had to find to impeach Trump in the House and then convict him in the Senate. But the ones who did what morality clearly required, people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. They're obviously the cream of the crop. And they're a tiny minority. They got kicked out. I mean, she got kicked out. He just knew well enough to withdraw. I mean, he knew that in that party, sociopathy rules. They would kick out Liz Cheney for having the integrity and the courage to give up her political position in order to keep her oath. And it wasn't just the Republicans in the House who kicked her out of the leadership position to punish her for having integrity. But the whole Republican Party of Wyoming, kicked her out of the party, and then in the primary, it replaced her with somebody who was willing to go with the sociopath at the top of the. How did this happen? How did we get so much sociopathy controlling a political force? And I think that what you can say is that when the people who have internalized a harsh morality get put into this situation where they don't have the help they need to be decent people, some of them will become quite openly sociopathic, like Matt Gaetz or something like that. But the others of them will become at least sociopathic enough that force is powerful enough to get them to give their political support to sociopaths. Universal wolf has taken over. Now, I don't know. This is not something that gets readily healed. I think we have to work over the course of the generations to do two things. One is to help both parts of our body politic, the people who, on the liberal side, who hadn't sufficient respect for the needs to be, for a society to be well ordered, that you can't just have it be the sum of the individual parts making their individual decisions. And I think we've moved in that direction since those heady days of the early 70s. And I think we need to also work our way toward the kind of morality that is appropriate to have the power of society help in the ways that are appropriate. And that is humane enough so that people don't need the help of an exoskeleton where they shouldn't need it, so that they don't need to make everybody else do the way they think should be done. Like nobody can have, like a national abortion ban is the exoskeleton's way of saying, I am not comfortable in a world where the society tells me I can, around the issue of abortion, I can live in accordance with my own religious beliefs about whether that growing thing inside this woman is entitled to be considered life that has to be protected. I've got my beliefs about that. I am not willing for other people to live according to how they see it, that they think something I regard as murder, they regard as something else, which is permissible for in certain ways for certain reasons. That there's an approval, that we are better off, in my opinion, on the issue of abortion. I have respect for the people who might decide that once this life has begun in whatever very primitive form it is, there's something here that needs to be treated as sacred because of what it is and or what it is becoming. I can make an argument along that way. But it is not one of those things where we all have to agree. And it's not like Americans had, any kind of consensus on this issue. What would I think if 99% of the people agreed with the anti-abortion side of things? Well, I think in that case, if it was 99% to 1%, I think that is different. I mean, for example, we don't think that human sacrifice is permissible. Though some people's religions historically, it has called for human sacrifice. It's not like there are no lines, but, Americans have made a real effort to, resolve this issue between them. And I think that if our choice is either one side imposes its values on everybody, and that would be the traditionalists, the people for whom abortion has been a major political issue. Either they impose all their views on everybody, or everybody gets to make their own choice about. And I believe that that Roe v. Wade was rightly decided, but for the wrong reasons. I don't think the right to privacy gets at it. If it were murder, you don't let some guy murder his wife or children in a private space. What's at stake here is that choice between a society in which the views of one group, which turns out to be a minority of the society in terms of Dobbs, or even worse, the more extreme versions. Either the minority imposes its religious views on everybody, on a majority, in fact, or everybody gets to live in accordance with their own values and beliefs. And I opt for the second to be clearly the American way, that if you have a need to enforce something because the society can't really function with everybody doing their thing, and you could probably come up with various shoulds or thou shalt nots or something like that, that say, we don't allow murder. We don't, even if there were a religion that allowed murder, we wouldn't allow murder. But abortion is not one of those issues. We can have millions of Americans who feel real pain about what's going on in the rest of their society on this issue. But they're able to live the life that's true to their spirit. And I think that is, in a way, the most fundamental of rights. That is really the heart of liberty, is that you get to choose your path to the extent possible that doesn't do serious injury to other people or to the functioning of the general social order. That's where you got to draw the line. We're in a battle now. We don't have time to pay attention to, or at least much attention. Maybe in the campaign that we need to run to defeat fascism right now. There are ways of addressing this issue. I can't think of any at the moment. Basically, this is a long-term issue as far as I can see. We simply have to defeat um, the that big part of conservative America um, that's come out of our social evolutionary process having to do with liberty and range of choices and such. On the side of fascism, we just have to defeat them in the short term. Uh, and hope that this time they will accept the fact that they got defeated. I mean, isn't it maddening? These people are so lawless at this stage with their universal wolf that they're backing in the form of Donald Trump and the Trump party, that they won't even admit when they're defeated. I mean, we Americans play out this game according to the rules, but a sociopath doesn't give a damn about rules. It's just what gets him what he wants. There's a brokenness there because I don't think that most of my Trumpy neighbors have any notion of how sociopathic they're being and how much they're buying into falsehoods to falsely justify um, their support for this thing that's supposedly going to make America great again. Way broken. And the brokenness traces back to the excessively wounding morality that is conveyed in that part of a conservative culture. And that in turn is the result of civilized societies getting shaped less than we really would want by what do human beings need and how do we organize a society to meet those needs. And civilized societies have been shaped to a very, very great degree by the answer to the question, how does a civilized society need to be shaped in order to survive, to prevail in a war of all against all among civilized societies? I know that's a big leap, but that gets us to the parable of the tribes. That there's an inevitability about something really, really big that happens as soon if a creature that evolves biologically on this planet takes a step that's unprecedented in those billions of years of inventing its own way of life, of extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically. This is a really big deal, and people haven't looked at what a big deal it is, and that's been in what got me going on my mission in life, which is to show that a force gets unleashed because inevitably there's going to be an anarchy in the system that's created by this breakthrough of a creature inventing its own way of life. There's in everything that's been created by evolution up to that point, what's being created is synergistic systems where all the different actors are following their own internal law, free to do what they want to do, but everything that they are programmed to do has been shaped by a process which makes sure that it fits in with the whole rest of the system. That's what gets selected for, not just individuals and species, but whole ecosystems that work together to create a perpetual motion machine that ends up being a well-ordered biosphere. But you step outside of that, you step into anarchy. And the anarchy means a war of all against all. And the war of all against all means a selection for certain kinds of cultures and the exclusion and the elimination of others. Only the ways that that can prevail in a war of all against all can survive and spread. And what do you suppose those things are like? well, in the world, we occasionally get to see what gains control when there's that kind of a situation. In Lebanon in the 70s and 80s, and in Somalia in the 90s, you get warlords, you get the gangster is the one that can prevail in a war of all against all. It's a real tragic drama that the species turns out to be enacting. Here it is, this marvelous thing that's able to create its own way of life. It's smarter, it's got a stronger creative intelligence than any creature in the history of the planet, and therefore it's able to make this step by, heading by step into a process that's going to end up being agriculture and empires and these really ugly things. Well, why are these empires are emerging? So many people are slaves, and the many dominate and exploit the few. Golly, how did go from these more or less egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands to these empires that made war on weaker peoples and enslaved the survivors, celebrated their warlike tendencies in their ancient monuments? Yeah, the answer, and this is a really big step all by itself, is that human creativity unleashed inevitably a social evolutionary force that would be meant that their societies would be disproportionately shaped by the spirit of the gangster. Or to put what's inevitable in a slightly different language, it inevitably would select for the ways of power. And here we get back to the harsh moralities. If you get a kind of elimination tournament over millennia, not like a few weeks like the March Madness, but you start with 64 teams, and then after the first round you got 32, and something like that has been going on in the civilized world since the whole beginning of the thing, 10 or 12,000 years ago, as interactions take place that inevitably devolve into a kind of a war of all against all, and in which inevitably, if you've got a certain kind of potentiality embodied in a society and the people who drive it, you end up with these tyrants taking over the world. It is not a random selection process, this tournament. You start off with many thousands of hunting-gathering societies. I don't know how much they were organized into cultural patterns, but they were individual societies, probably with their own individual differences. Lots of different choices, and gradually, as this war of all against all unfolds, this really does, by the way, connect with how to understand the crisis in America right now of democracy versus fascism. Because what's selected for in the ways of power means that you're going to have societies that are requiring people to become things that are not very happy to become. If you're a slave, or if you're a slave driver, or if you're if they need ferocious warriors that are highly motivated to slice enemies' heads off. If that's what it takes, or if it's a particular way of thinking that is sociopathic, like Tom Lehrer's song about Werner von Braun, where they would go up, having to do with the V1 and V2 rifle missiles falling on London and killing innocent people. And where they come down, that's not my department, says Werner von Braun. There are all kinds of human possibilities, and the process of struggle for power leading to a selection for certain kind, non-random of the ways of power, that means that the culture is going to impose on the people living in it a set of demands that have been helpful for that society to maximize its power in the anarchic intersocietal system that inevitably arises with civilization. There's no order that regulates how civilized societies will interact with each other. Never has been. We've been struggling toward it in certain ways since the beginnings of international law and the League of Nations and the United Nations, but we basically still have an anarchic intersocietal system, as has been demonstrated by this fascist monster in Moscow with his invasion of his neighbor, Ukraine. And we worry about what will happen across the Straits of Taiwan. We still do not have anything but an anarchic order in which there are all sort of early attempts, but not trivial attempts to build on. But that generates a selection for cultures that know how to exploit, use their members to get maximal power. I've never tried to figure out, to make a case about what the psychological structure of my Trumpy neighbors that I actually do know something about. I had a son that went preschool to 8th through 8th grade in the schools here. That led to a lot of contact. And I did these talk radio shows. So in what way are these people shaped in such a way that they are useful to power? Well, you can see how they're useful to a certain kind of power. A fascistic power can exploit some of their vulnerabilities, and their vulnerabilities include they've been wounded by a very controlling top-down kind of system. Let me illustrate that. I remember one of the radio shows I did had to do with saying that my son had encountered in his, what was it? Was it the elementary school or the the 5 through 7 thing? Anyway, I think it was the elementary school. They had teachers in the hall to enforce that no student could have a drink of water to be at the fountain for more than 5 seconds. Now, I went to public schools. I went to public schools in several locations. K through 4, I did in East Lansing, Michigan. 5th grade was PS 64 in Baltimore, and then moved to Minnesota and Lexington School in suburban St. Paul. We never had any kind of rule like that. I mean, there wasn't any need for any kind of rule like that. Everybody was going to get a drink. It wasn't like people, bogarted that drinking fountain for 5 minutes or anything like that. You drink the water you need. It takes 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Maybe if you've been outside running around, it takes 15 seconds. But so I raised that question on the radio show. Why have a rule about this? Why not just, this fit into a larger pattern, as you might imagine, that there's just a lot of control of the kids, beyond anything that I'd had in, like East Lansing, Michigan, post-war, graduate students and young faculty and the townspeople, their kids. There wasn't that kind of a regime, but my son was experiencing a real top-down regime, and now I think that that can be connected with somebody being, if you got to internalize something which is that, in a sense, disrespectful of your ability to find your own path and to, to have, um, to make judgments, there's going to be a woundingness about that. It is creating a constituency um, for fascism, which is, I think, also reflected in the way that this culture that I live in. I think some of those same dynamics enter into their relationship with the Confederacy, which continues to be a very powerful part of their identity. And it's based on falsehood. So let me segue into another topic that I've listed for today. Fascism habitually insists on false realities. Now, I thought about that over this weekend because of what Putin's been doing in the wake of the terrible terrorist atrocity in Moscow. I don't. I have strongly anti-Russian regime feelings, and I feel appalled at what the whole power of the Russian state is doing in Ukraine. I mean, it is just so ugly. And though I feel some compassion for the Russian soldiers that were getting ground up in the meat grinder before our American fascists blocked our giving aid to Ukraine for these months, it makes me feel sick. I also celebrate when the Ukrainians are able to inflict great damage on the Russian military, from sinking ships in the Black Sea to destroying artillery pieces to killing these poor Russian boys that are tools of the fascist dictator who heads this terrible regime. I feel compassion for them, but I don't know that anything good is going to come out of what's happened in Moscow. Who knows how things will play out in Russia. That Prigozhin mutiny looked promising for a bit, and I still don't understand why he turned back. It looked like the way to Moscow looked like it was open to him, as far as what I could tell, and he stopped, and then he ends up getting killed. I'm confused about what happened there. I guess I'll wait for the movie. I don't know if it'd be too stressful to watch that movie, but anyway, I watched what Putin did. It was interesting. I turned on the TV. I knew that there would be wall-to-wall coverage. These videos are always the ones that get wall-to-wall coverage. A shooting in a school, or a hurricane, or this kind of a terrorist attack. I feel a bit critical. I don't know what they should do instead. But these events are important, but they get this wall-to-wall coverage treatment where we see the same footage again and again and again. We see the policeman running into the school, or we see anyway. They're not the heart of what's going on. But I guess the idea is that humans are humans, and we want to actually see something and democracy versus fascism. We're back to that problem of what's really going on fundamentally is very deep and very big, and not easily envisioned because we're human beings who live in a particular time and place, and we see something and we get to the concrete thing of Donald Trump saying something absurd, and not the big phenomenon that we've watched for 30 couple years, that force of fascism has taken over a major American political party. And this is just one of the manifestations. Anyway, going back to Putin. So the journalists were very responsible. They said, we don't know who did this. And, a lot of them said, I'm not going to speculate, which is we don't know. We didn't know who did this. We heard there were 2 to 5. Yeah, anyway. But then they brought in some experts like John Brennan, the former director of national intelligence or something like that, and a couple of other people who are knowledgeable and good. McFaul, the former ambassador to Russia, or I guess it was Russia, not the Soviet Union. And they called our attention right away to there are 2 questions. They said one is who actually is going to be found to be responsible here, and I think we got the answer with in a matter of however many hours that was, that ISIS-K, is it called, the Islamic State or something, that they claim responsibility. So not only the one question is who's responsible, and they too withheld any speculation, except to say this doesn't look like anything the Ukrainians would ever want to do. But then the second question is, what is Putin going to claim? Who is he going to claim is responsible? Because they understood that this fascist isn't into the truth. The question for him isn't just, what are the facts and what do I, tell my people this is what's going on? Not at all. Immediately, it's what lie should I tell the people? Or what should I tell the people, whether it's true or not, that will best serve my purposes, which is consolidating my power, extending my power, by getting people to think and feel what I want them to think, contrary to the truth, or whether it has anything to do with the truth or not. And in this case, it doesn't have anything to do with the truth. I mean, the American discussions of the fact that we privately informed the Putin administration, Russian intelligence, whatever, that we had picked up good reason, apparently really strong reason, because we put out this public statement also about the danger of a massive terrorist attack of this very kind. And warning the Putin administration, and people will comment that this is, the duty to warn that even though we are in as McFaul said, in the context of this adversarial time between the United States and Russia because of Ukraine, even then, if we had intelligence about the encroaching danger of a terrorist attack, we will share that with them. So that's duty to warn, and it's sort of admirable that the United States, we, in spite of our being really at daggers drawn with each other here about Ukraine, we're going to act also like allies in the fight against terrorism. I guess that's how you might put it. I haven't heard that allies, but that's sort of the implication. But then several days before this thing, Putin just goes and he turns the warning into a threat. I don't know why you would do that. But he went public in some way or other. I mean, I don't know if it was nationally televised in Russia or not, but he went out there on a limb that must have been really unfortunate. when it turned out that there was such an attack, the biggest in 20 years, lurking in the wings. I mean, if he did put it out so that the Russian people heard what he was saying about how the United States is trying to intimidate them, and, the thing, the meta point that I'm making here is that fascism is quite attached to the lie. And I think it's indicative of the various ways that different forms of brokenness congregate together in the world to create our most dangerous threats. That the brokenness of the lie, being detached from reality, goes along with the brokenness of a leader who would take a peaceful European order that was a huge achievement and transform it into a domain of war again. And the lie goes along with the tyranny, goes along with the predilection for conflict, goes along with human misery. Fascism and the lie they go together. I'm not saying that fascists are the only ones that get into lying, but you know, the idea of the big lie emerged out of the writings of Goebbels, Hitler's propagandists, whom my understanding is, and I really should Google this because I haven't read it in a while. My understanding back, I'd say 2005, 2006, when I was first starting to really study fascism and what it means and how it arises and such, that Newt Gingrich was employing Goebbels' devices, that he was studying Goebbels. Anyway, Goebbels is the one that originates the idea of the big lie. If it's such a big lie, if it's so unbelievable, if you say it often enough, people will begin to think that it's true. I mean, there's a whole section someplace in Goebbels that I haven't read for probably half a century. That's about the value of and how to do it, how to persuade masses of people that the big lie is true. And now we in America, as we have fascism arising, we've got a new big lie, which is the name that the pro-democracy component of our political battle has given to Trump's claim that the election was stolen from him. It is so obviously a lie. I mean, one of the great mysteries that I've ever encountered in the human world, a lifetime of looking at wherever I could find really interesting stuff that poses mysteries. This mystery, how do you get intelligent people to believe that the election was stolen when there are mountains of evidence that show that that's not true? I mean, just mountains of all kinds of evidence. And also, it's been enacted right in front of our very eyes that Trump was going to be lying, that he has been lying, that he does lie. And yet the polls indicate that the majority of the people in the Republican electorate believe it. I don't know, does that verify what Goebbels said you could do? But that's brokenness. And of course, Trump and the Trump party represent brokenness. They're pushing in the direction of greater brokenness on every dimension of our political and social development, from disenfranchisement to climate change, to relations between the races, to widening still further the already way unacceptable gap between the richest and the rest in this country. I mean, it's up and down the line, brokenness, greater brokenness, and always the lie. So the people, going back to the people who need the exoskeleton and become easy prey to a fascist force, and how they continue to support the Confederacy, which was in many ways the same force that we've got now. I mean, there's differences, but I would say that in most essential ways, the slave power that gave us the Confederacy and the Civil War was profoundly akin to the force that's operating in America now. You can Google my last name and the title, "The Force That Gave Us the Civil War Is Back," which I wrote in 2014. I think it appeared on Huffington Post. But in any event, it's on my website. So this is something that we have contended with in other destructive times in our history. And so it is fitting in a way that the same people who are going to vote 70% for Trump come November, maybe a little less if we're lucky, they're the same population that when the school board, which was personed by some good people, decided that Shenandoah County, where I live, should cease to send out the message about what it's about to the world by naming, like my kid, if he had gone to high school here, he would have gone to Stonewall Jackson High School. And when he went to elementary school, he went to Ashby Lee. Those are all Confederate generals. And the school board decided that that wasn't the message that here in the 21st century we should be sending out to tell the world who we are here in Shenandoah Valley, Shenandoah County. And the same thing is true up and down the Shenandoah Valley, too. This is Confederate country. Anyway, the public rose up. The public rose up in great rage. The Confederacy was such an important part of their identity that they were not going to accept having that erased from the names of things around here. I'm not sure how far. I mean, it was definitely a majority thing. The school board was pilloried, and it was voted out of power. And I think the current school board is their school board, which incidentally is also a kind of school board that will think about book banning. And their identity with respect to the Civil War is based on lies. I am not my PhD includes history, but I'm not a historian. But I've taught it, I've studied it, and I've studied in particular the culture of the slave power and how it led to the Civil War. The Confederacy was about slavery, pure and simple. That's denied by the post-Civil War South from the very beginning. The South acted unlawfully in precipitating this war. lawlessness as a form of brokenness, the willingness to be lawless, not to take the issue to the Supreme Court, to assert what they had no right to assert, the right to secede, led to the brokenness of a war from which we are still wounded. Brokenness. And then there's the brokenness of the lie that it wasn't the South that was at fault here, but this is the war of northern aggression, which I would get sometimes on the radio when I occasionally would stick a toe into talking about the Confederacy in my radio show here on an AM station. That was the strongest signal within this rather limited piece of conservative Confederate America. It wasn't the war of northern aggression. The aggression was from those who fired on Fort Sumter. They did not have the right to fire on Fort Sumter. But South Carolina was the hotbed of the secessionists, and they no longer accepted that they were under the, what's the word I'm looking for? Not aegis, but not domination, the authority of the federal government. That Abraham Lincoln was the president, and they acted like sociopaths. They were willing to assert their right to go to war to defend slavery against a duly constituted constitutional power. And by defend slavery, let's be clear, Lincoln wasn't going to free the slaves. He was going to prevent the slave empire. He was going to try to prevent the slave empire from expanding into the rest of the country. It was the South that had been aggressive in the 1850s. This fugitive slave law, the way they tried to lawlessly rig the Constitution for Kansas, the way they handed down the Dred Scott decision. The North was responding. And that's what happened in 1861, too. Lincoln sent ships to fortify the fort there at Fort Sumter, and did everything he could to dissuade the Southerners from preventing it being restocked. And the Southerners chose war. And then after the war, they start talking about the war of northern aggression that the people around here still talk about. It's like what Putin does with respect to this fire. Well, let's blame the Ukrainians. That's what serves our purpose. And there's no respect for the truth. It creates a political culture that's ready to believe the lies. So we got, like 2/3 of the Republican electorate believe that the election was stolen from Trump. Similar 2/3, 3/4 believe that the charges against Trump are political persecution, witch hunt, election interference. They believe it. It's so obviously untrue, but they believe it. Now, well, why do people believe such lies? Well, I do have a video that I commend to your attention. If you go to my YouTube library of videos, search for vulnerable. What makes people vulnerable to lies? And there are a lot of dimensions to the answer. And let's see if our earlier conversation about the exoskeletons. There's wholeness has got to do with integration. Brokenness is the failure to integrate. in that essay that I've got about the endoskeletons and the exoskeletons, I have a quotation from St. Paul, not St. Paul, Minnesota, but the guy who wrote a lot of the New Testament. And he says, "The good that I would do, I do not. And the evil that I would do, that I do." Um, he's saying he doesn't want to do the evil. I wish I remember the quotation better. Go there, you'll see. Basically, what Paul is doing is he's identifying with when he says I, he means the good I. And he talks about the part of him that wants to do evil as if it isn't part of him, as if it's the not I. And that's a lie. The forbidden impulse is a part of him. And there's a brokenness when he doesn't identify with that part of him that he wants to prevent from having its way, but that itself wants to get its way. So there's a lack of integrity built into the unintegrated sense of self, which definitely goes along with the internalization of a false morality. Let me recommend to anybody who's interested in seeing how this works psychologically. There's a book, or it's actually, I think, 2-volume book by Theodor Adorno and several other guys. After the Nazi era and the World War II, they made a study of the authoritarian personality. And I think I haven't read it in a long time, but I think they fundamentally show some very rich and complex set of connections between like child rearing practices and brokenness of various kinds, including the lie, the failure to recognize and integrate the self. That's brokenness. And it goes along with the brokenness of St. Paul thinking that the evil that he ends up doing isn't something that he wanted. Well, part of him wanted it. He's not just the one that wants the right thing. If you can unify the should and the want, the more you can unify it, the more whole a person can be. And the less reason there is to lie. Now, Trump is just a barrel of lies. I mean, everything about him is a lie, except that it's true that he has some extraordinary abilities. I'll skip the extraordinary abilities. We've got him telling the big lie about the stolen election. We got him telling the new big lie about this is just a political prosecution, whereas the truth is quite clearly that even a chicken shit Merrick Garland eventually had to do something to prosecute this guy, lest he preside over the complete devastation of the rule of law in this country by forfeiting the idea that nobody is above the law. The force of fascism is continually showing a lack of any particular regard for the truth. Just like Putin, so also the Trump party. For example, they've been telling their followers that the Biden economy is terrible. Well, Biden came into office at a time that the whole world was having to recover from the devastating impact of a worldwide deadly pandemic, which created all kinds of supply chain problems that led to inflation and led to unemployment during Trump's last year, and the fascist force that's trying to create a falsehood in the minds of this fascist support system out there in the electorate is saying that the election is terrible. I mean that the economy is terrible. The American economy is actually the envy of all the OECD economies in terms of our growth rate being higher than the other countries, our inflation rate being lower. Everybody has been dealing with very difficult situations, and we came out in first place in the competition to extricate ourselves in the best possible shape. And while Biden doesn't get all the credit for that, I mean, there are various factors for it. It does look like the choices that Biden has made have been creditable. But out there in fascist world, there's this lie that the economy is terrible. People shouldn't. When it's got to do with the larger economy, they're subject to being deceived more easily because it's kind of hard to see from your own vantage point the whole economy. But if you ask Americans, how is your family's economic situation? I think it's 60-some% say we're doing fine. So the part they can see is in good shape. Not everybody, but a big majority. But if you look at a big majority of Americans think that the larger picture is lousy, I'm not sure how much the fascist force has to do with it. I mean, the numbers of people who think that go beyond the Fox News crowd and such. And we have a similar situation going on with respect to the crime rate. Apparently, Americans, and especially Republicans, I mean, in both cases we're dealing, especially Republicans. Republicans are very partisan in their perceptions of the economy. You can see that as soon as when Trump was president, they thought things were great when they weren't so great. They thought things under Biden have been terrible when they really improved a whole lot. The Democrats move a little bit in that way, but not nearly as much, according to some polls that have been analyzed. Paul Krugman's very good about all this stuff. The Republican world thinks that all the cities are killing fields of crime. Trump's inaugural speech was American Carnage themed. Isn't that extraordinary? If you compare our crime rates in recent years, back in 2016 compared with 30 years before, and nowadays compared to certain stretches of the pandemic, but especially compared to an earlier era, this business about the crime rate being out of control is really just it's completely bogus. The crime rate's been coming down for more than a year, and it came down a whole lot from where it used to be. So somehow the lie and the fascist world just seem to keep going together. I don't know what politically can be done to disabuse people, but there are probably a lot of people who believe that the economy isn't, who don't recognize how good the economy is, who could be led to, and who don't recognize that we're not in a big crime wave, but could be led to. That could be an important part of bringing people over, because fascism has sold a whole lot of lies to a whole lot of people somehow. Well, I guess we're coming to the end of, unless I change my mind, the second, this live stream, the second hour of it. Let me say, that when I call myself in these live streams a man on a mission, I'm trying to call attention to there being a particular purpose to my embarking on making videos like this at the prodding of my firstborn son and another young man of the same generation who think that there are real potentialities if I use this medium in some such way as this. I'm on that mission because I have a belief, which is not a superficial belief. It goes very deep. It's been thought through over a lot of years, and I'm fully committed to it. I believe that I've got a integrated understanding of the human story to offer, that if it became sufficiently widespread in how our civilization thinks about some important questions, like what kind of creatures are we? Why has our history been the way it has? And what are the challenges we have to meet for human civilization to survive on this planet for the long haul? That if this integrated vision got out there far enough, it could have a beneficial impact on our ability to make it as a species and a civilization. And you know, I regard it as really a toss-up whether we're going to make it. So I feel driven. You know, that's the whole thing about my work life for a whole long time, is I feel driven to get this out sufficiently. And what would be sufficiently? I've addressed that question in previous conversations. I've said, well, I don't think any idea, no matter what, is going to get out there better than, say, Freud and Marx got out when I was getting educated. I can't think of anybody who's had more of their thinking absorbed by more people over a certain span of time. So if that's as good as is possible, then I ask myself, well, okay, how about that much? And then there are two sets of questions, and I'll pay attention to one of them. But the first one that I won't pay attention to is, if you did get it out that much, how plausible is it that it would actually have the kind of beneficial impact? I like that question because, because it's important. And there's some things I'm confident about, and there's some things that I'm not. I am confident about what it is I put together, and I just really think that you won't find anything like it. But the question of whether it actually would have that kind of impact enough to be discernible about how things go, well, if it's a toss-up, how discernible does it have to be? You know, there are tipping points. And anyway, I'm just one person. I got to give it my all. If it can have even just a tiny thing, and the probability of it having an impact is minuscule, still, there's so much at stake. will American democracy is at stake, but will human civilization survive on this planet is at stake. And given, depending on how we might destroy ourselves, is the whole bubble of life on this planet at stake? Well, I'll do what I can. Then the second question is, what would it take to get my integrative vision, my better human story out there that much, enough to make that discernible difference, let's say. And that's where really the swinging for the fences thing in my original topic list comes in. It would take a lot, and I recognize that there are issues of plausibility about getting from where I am right now and seeking to get a following that will follow me seriously enough in particular so that by the end of whatever, the integrative vision is a lens through which they see the world. I mean, that's what the mission is. Right now, I'm told that this is progressing in a way that you would is consistent with the possibility of it becoming what the home run that swinging for the fences would have it be. I'm told that we're growing in numbers, that people are listening for a longer time. I don't know, but it's real small, and I don't know how many things that trace the kind of building that's going on for this man on a mission thing. I don't know what proportion of them ever develop into something big enough that that the ideas that are being presented get a chance to have a real presence in the thinking of the civilization. I mean, one of the things I say is, I turn 78 next month. I feel like if I were to die right now, there are some pieces of what I've put together that would be available for a plausible human future, like that thing back there. There are, tens of thousands of them. Some of them, probably 10, I don't know. There are a bunch of them probably on people's shelves. People might eventually get there. Then they might say, well, what did this guy say? After this was a long time ago. Came out in 1984. Where did he go from there? Well, and then somebody might search and find. I'm going to leave my website is basically built to be something that survives me, but still, I'm trying to achieve something now and not in some very distant future. And a lot of stuff that's been put together, I know that it's not out there enough so that it's really plausible that it would be anything but a very trivial part of how people are thinking about things as we navigate our way as a civilization into the future, where we might blow ourselves up and destroy the biosphere, or we might get our act together. So I don't know. Let me just put out one, in addition to following, if you're intrigued by what you sense might be on offer here. The other thing I would ask you to do is to ask yourself the question, do I know somebody who would be interested in getting such a integrative vision, a way of understanding the human story, if this guy's claims were valid, that there is something here that really could have a beneficial impact. let's say, and that clarifies things and says some important things, that puts some things into a importantly different light about our nature and our story and the challenges we face. Do I know somebody who would want to do that? And if you do, uh, I would be grateful if you would recruit them to take a look. My part of the bargain is I'll do my best to deliver something worth delivering. Uh, the reason I say that is that the my fear about coming forward and being really straightforward about there's something important here, which takes chutzpah to say. My fear has always been about people will think, how plausible is that? So it was credibility. But I've come to believe that I'm not sure how much the credibility issue is really the problem. Though, I gravitate toward that one because I don't want anybody to see me as grandiose. So that, that's got to do with my own personal need about how I'm seen. But I think that the bigger problem may be that in the way that people think in our civilization these days, which we were talking about earlier in this thing about we see things in pieces and not make connections, is that there aren't that many people who would either believe that there is such a thing as a way of seeing things pretty whole, or and who wouldn't be interested, or just don't have the mental habit of trying to see things whole. I mean, I point every time when I talk about this, I point to the fact that whereas when I was getting to be, a thinker in the 50s going in, and then through the 60s, Marx and Freud were people that had a following in some meaningful sense. Now, not only is Marx not the presence he used to be, as far as I can see, and not only has Freud lost a whole lot of space in the intellectual picture of the world in our civilization, but there is nobody else in that same category of people who develop a perspective on the human world. There is nothing there of that magnitude. And I am inclined to infer from that there's an issue here in our civilization about putting the pieces together. So that's why I'm particularly interested that if you know a bunch of people, everybody knows a bunch of people, if you know one of those maybe rare birds that are really interested in understanding things in a way that the people who are followed Freud or followed Marx were interested in getting some kind of understanding. I mean, I like what I have to offer better than either of those. I had a chance to learn what I think was worth learning from both of those. But if you know somebody who would want something that did what those people thought those guys did for them, please invite them to check this out. My guess is that this mission that I've been on for over half a century and succeeded, enough to feel like, I wasn't a nothing, but succeeded not at all enough to feel like I've achieved the mission, which was to have an impact. Well, I've come to terms with I will do what I can, and it's not in my hands what the results are. I've gotten used to trying things and having them not work out. But I also like the movies where the guy tries and he tries and he tries. And then by the end of the time, Edison's 10,000th light bulb or something like that. Maybe this will be Edison's 10,000th light bulb because I really have been trying to get this out. And let me just say that the ideas, the fact that they've been out there, like that one out there, the fact that it's not been seized hold of everybody's thinking, it has not been refuted. Nobody has laid a glove on it. It makes bold assertions that, if they were valid, would have profound ramifications. And nobody's refuted it in the least. So it's just as much the new idea that it was when it came out into the wider world in 1940, 1940, no, 1904. The New York Times thought it was an important book. They published a full-page review of it, which was a way of somebody thought it was important, but it hasn't been important. Esquire magazine, because of that book, just called me one of the men and women under 40 who are changing the nation. I was in a magazine with Eddie Murphy, and they had dozens of people, but only one or two thinkers, and I was one of them, changing the nation. Well, I didn't change the nation. Somebody there thought, oh, this is going to, have an impact. Well, I thought so too. But what happened was, it got out there. Nobody refuted it. It got, maybe a few thousand people taking it really seriously. But the thinking world as a whole basically ignored it. Didn't refute it, didn't accept it, didn't struggle with it. So it's brand new. The question of why didn't it struggle with it? Well, one of the things I've come up with is, well, take a look at the fact that nobody's got something in there occupying the space, or the kind of space that I was aspiring to, that I, in my naivete, believed, if I get this out there in a compelling way, it's got to have, knock people on their butts like it did me. I mean, it came to me and it changed the whole course of my life. But no, it didn't do that. And as for why, I don't know. But as for what it is unrefuted, well-developed, revelatory idea that has subsequently been integrated with a whole lot of other dimensions that all fit together in a coherent way. Do you know somebody who'd want that if it were there? Anyway, in addition, I enjoy this. I have a passion because it's been such a meaningful part of my life. It's really kind of a privilege to even imagine that there are people listening to me say what it is that I think. Sharing, articulating is a source of pleasure just in itself, but especially much more to imagine that I'm sharing this thing that I've come upon, this way of understanding. Because we're all in this together, and if there's something useful here that's going to help defeat Trump in the election, help heal the Republican base, these exoskeletons that are prone to being exploited by a fascist force, help lead the human civilization to order itself well enough and soon enough to survive on this planet for the long haul and not destroy itself in some self-inflicted catastrophe. Well, it's a privilege, and I appreciate your being here, whoever's listening. Thank you.